Farmers around the world are demanding more security from their leaders. But across India, those demands remain unmet, leaving tens of thousands of protesters to block streets and confront police. The government says they're asking too much, but is it simply time for growers to get more? I'm Andrea Sankey, and today's newsmakers are India's farmers. From France to the UK, Greece, and Poland, farmers have been taking on their governments, demanding better money and protection for their crops. And in India, for the second time in 3 years, protesting farmers from some 200 unions are coming out in droves, blocking roads and camping out to make their demands heard. But unlike in 2020, the government has barricaded entry routes to the capital and seems to be fighting the minimum standard price demand even harder. This in a country where farmers represent a huge voting bloc, yet can earn an average of just $120 a month for their work. Here's a look now at how Indian farmers are fighting for a better life.
From the heartlands of Punjab and Haryana to the streets leading to New Delhi, India's farmers unite once again in a colossal march.
We have come here for our children. The future of our children is at stake. If we come here, we will take what is rightfully ours.
The Indian government has offered guaranteed support prices for pulses, corn and cotton in a bid to break a deadlock with protesting farmers after week-long clashes between security forces and protesters. Rejecting the proposal, the farmers' leaders declared that they will continue the protest and march towards the Indian capital. Although the guardians of the green are aware of the barricades that await them, they are sticking to their demands, which include a fair price for their toil.
My family stops me from protesting, but our expenses are not covered. I have 2 children, daughters. I have a family. What choice do I have? Our lands are gone. Our rights are gone. The government does not give us the rights when we demand them.
Their path is met with resistance. Barricades, tear gas and detentions by authorities mark their journey for justice.
We were told farmers are bringing heavy machinery to the protest site, so we requested the Punjab police to not allow that to be brought to the border. We appealed to the farmers as well as they said in their press conference that they want to protest peacefully. We welcome this approach.
And authorities have also suspended mobile internet service in some areas and blocked social media accounts of some protest leaders. This isn't their first time pressing the government to give them what they believe is their just due. In 2021, their perseverance led to a victory against controversial farm laws.
I believe this protest is now a matter of life and death for farmers, not only from Punjab, but also farmers from across the nation. It doesn't matter if I lose my foot or my leg. For us, carrying this movement forward is important for our future, our livelihood and our children.
The farmers said they consulted with industry experts to review the government's latest proposal. They say they will resume marching towards the capital after rejecting a proposal to buy some crops at assured prices on a 5-year contract. As talks stalled and a countrywide strike looms, the nation waits to see if history will repeat itself, with those in the halls of power acting on the cries of those with the power to feed.
So with talks in an apparent stalemate, how long can the government and farmers hold out? And where might they find a compromise? Well, joining me now to debate that and more are from Hyderabad, Kiran Kumar Vissa. He's the representative of the farmers' organization, Samyukta Kisan Morcha. From New Delhi is Robinder Sachdev. He is the president of the Imagindia Institute. And from Chandigarh, agricultural policy expert, Devinder Sharma. Thanks all so much for being with me. I also have to mention, we did reach out to the Indian government for their participation in this program. Unfortunately, we were told they couldn't comment. But let me begin with Kiran. We know farmers are looking for that minimum support price for their crops, but there's actually a lot more to their demands. So you tell us why else they're out there protesting, and how long and how hard might they be willing to fight this time?
Right. So the minimum support price and implementation of the minimum support price is one of the key demands of the farmers. The government does announce minimum support price for several crops, for 23 crops, but it doesn't implement them, which means that the farmers do not get the benefit of that. So that's the key demand. But there are several other demands. Basically, farmers in India, especially small marginal farmers, are heavily in debt. So they're also asking for a debt relief package from the government. Apart from that, they're also seeking a good, robust crop insurance system, because the present crop insurance system has failed the farmers during natural calamities and crop losses. They're also asking for the withdrawal of the cases which were filed in the previous round of farmers' agitation, which happened over a period of 13 months. Some of these were actually promises that the government had made, which led to the temporary withdrawal of the previous round of agitation at the end of 2021. But even now, many of those demands are not met, and that's why the farmers are on the roads again.
So they're not met even though they were actually promised.
They were actually promised,
Yeah.
but they were not.
So, Kiran, I want to stick with you for a second, because I need you to tell me, how hard is life for farmers in India, proportionate to really how important they are to Indian society? I know one statistic actually says that a farmer kills himself every 30 minutes from the stress and pressure of being a farmer in India.
Right. It is a very difficult time for Indian farmers, particularly the small and marginal farmers, who constitute about 89% of Indian farmers, which means farmers who own less than 5 acres of land. The kind of situation that they're facing is, on the one hand, many of them do not get the institutional support that is required to make any enterprise successful. Farming, like any other enterprise, needs certain institutional structures to be in place for it to be viable. And it is the duty of the government to provide that kind of a structure for the farmer. But that is where the failure of the government can be seen. Most of the farmers, only about 50% of the farmers get bank loans for investing in their agriculture. And many of the tenant farmers who take land on lease, they're completely excluded from any government support systems, and they are the highest numbers of farmers who commit suicide. And also, farmers are caught in a nexus where they have to depend on private money lenders, who also often double up as dealers. So the same people that you buy seeds and fertilizers from are also giving you loans. And often they are also the people who buy the crop back from you. So therefore, farmers lack the bargaining capacity in order to get a good price for their crop. And because small and marginal farmers are crores in numbers, like tens of millions in numbers, the traders and the companies, which are the agribusiness companies, are able to dominate the market and set the price, which is not viable for the farmers. That's the reason why the minimum support price becomes a very important thing, because it seeks a government intervention whenever the markets actually fail.
Right.
And the price is too low, then the government is supposed to intervene to ensure that they get a fair price for their produce. That's the main demand.
Let me turn to Robinder. Simplest question: why hasn't the government implemented what it said it would regarding that minimum price some 2 years ago?
A great point, Andrea. Of course, there are many different aspects that Kiran was pointing out. Let's stick to the issue of the pricing, right? The problem with the minimum support price, which the farmers want, is, you could say, a nexus. It's a structural issue. And I'll take maybe 20 seconds to, demystify if I can. The government says to the farmer, you come to a government warehouse, which is the Food Corporation of India, you give your goods and you will get the minimum support price, whatever that price is. Another issue is that MSP should be higher than what is offered, but let's say right now it is 10 rupees. The farmer goes with his trucks loaded with his goods to sell to the government warehouse. What the corrupt officials there do, they discourage the farmer. They tell him, we don't have enough storage space. You come back after 2 days. We don't have enough sacks to unload and store your, wheat grains or whatever, and the sacks will come after a week. Now, this farmer, with his truckloads or tractor loads of the produce, is waiting outside the warehouse, let's say. So, what does he do? He goes to the private players, which again Kiran mentioned earlier. The private players there offer him a bargaining price because they know this guy is stuck. He cannot, sell his goods to the government at the MSP, whatever that be, because for the next 10 days, the warehouse is not accepting any more, products.
Okay.
The farmer is forced to sell at a lower price. What happens then? The government officials in a nexus. So, supposing this farmer sells at 7 rupees a kilo, whereas the government price was 10. Now, what the corrupt officials and the nexus of middlemen do, they buy it in the open market at 7, but the government officials to fulfill their quota that they have really paid the minimum support price and procured the goods, they buy back through middlemen those same goods at, let's say, 8 rupees, show it on government accounts as has been procured at 10 rupees. So as per the government records, 10 rupees has been paid to buy 1 kilo of rice.
So is this basically
Whereas,
corruption?
Yeah, there is corruption. It is embedded corruption. And that is the structural issue with regards to the MSP being available to the farmer.
Okay. Let me ask Devinder then. I mean, it's shocking, though. Fine, corruption can exist, anywhere. But this is a very respectable voting bloc we're talking about, these farmers. So really, I mean, how bad is it for Modi and other politicians, especially in the lead up to an election in May? It's quite politically risky, is it not, to go head to head? So why is the government so sure they're on the right side here, or is this just a real mess they've made that is not going to help them and is hurting the very people that would come to the polls to support them?
Well, I think we can keep our fingers crossed whether these protests will impact the electoral outcome in the ensuing elections. Because we have seen in the past that whenever farmers have protested, somehow when the election time comes, they are a divided lot, whether they vote according to the caste or religion or the political ideology and so on. But that is something which the political parties have always taken advantage of. Not only this political party that is ruling now, but also previous governments, at least previous political parties who were in the government. So the point I'm trying to make is the farmer unions being not coming together on these kind of issues as far as the electoral promise is concerned. So we will continue to have a kind of we'll keep our fingers crossed what happens in the next elections. But yes, otherwise the protests, as we know, are building up, and the more the government delays, more unions and farmers across the country are likely to join, not only in and around Delhi, but also in different state capitals. So that is one thing which is likely to build up. I can't be sure if the decision emerges soon. Perhaps we will not see that happening. But at the moment, it looks the decision is far away, but the farmers' protest is increasing, is building up. As was mentioned by my two colleagues earlier, the idea or the demand of the farmers is very clear. They want the minimum support price to be made legal, and this would mean that farmers, not only in the northwestern regions of Punjab and Haryana, but farmers across the country will gain. And this is a structural kind of improvement that the farmers are expecting in the agriculture policy. Now, whether it takes place or not, I have, impression that, with these farmers protest building up, the kind of protest building up, there will be a kind of rethinking. But the fact of the matter is we're going to have elections being announced soon, and then the code of conduct will prevail, and which means the hands of the central government will be tied. And that is why the farmers' protest is that we should be coming up with an ordinance before the elections are announced, because they seem to be in a hurry for obvious reason, because they have waited enough and they haven't yet been promised a minimum support price that everyone can benefit across the country.
So they are using their leverage with this timing. Kiran, do you think there will be, though, political consequences for this?
Like Devinderji said, it is to be seen whether the government responds and how it responds. Certainly from the last few days, it does seem that the government is on the defensive. on the one hand, they are, some of their people are trying to paint the protesters in negative light, or kind of exaggerating the impact of their demands, projecting that it will be a very hugely costly demand and so on. On the other hand, they are also desperate to have negotiations with the farmers, because I think that it is in their political interest to be seen to come to some kind of a negotiated settlement with the farmers. So that they are trying. However, the problem is that this government has backed itself into a corner where for several years, for the last 3 years, since the previous farmers agitation, they've not moved an inch on the demand of the minimum support price. In fact, they've gone out of their way to kind of delegitimize this demand. So now they have to walk back several of their statements in order to meet the farmers' demands, which is what it remains to be seen. But I do believe that if the government doesn't act in favor of the farmers, it is going to actually motivate farmers across the country to jump into this agitation. Tomorrow,
Okay.
the Samyukta Kisan Morcha, the national platform, has a meeting where they're going to discuss a nationwide campaign plan on taking this farmers' agitation forward.
Yeah, but Will, what I'm asking, I guess effectively, is where farmers tend to stand politically in India, if you can answer that question, especially for a foreign audience. We know, for example, in the United States, the farming community tends to lean a little bit to the right, conservative, Republican. And is it similar in India? Will this cost the BJP more than anyone else, or are they more loyal to the BJP because of their groups, their castes, whatever else, other social factors they consider for their political loyalty?
Right. No, that's a good question. That's an interesting question. The fact is that farmers are a divided constituency if you look at it in terms of political. And also in India, it's a multi-party system. So therefore, in each state also there are several parties which count farmers among their key constituencies. So it is not one way or the other that they are more towards the right or towards the left or caste-based and so on. So because it's a divided constituency, therefore, in each election, you actually find that the farmers' vote becomes crucial. If it does consolidate and shift to a certain direction in opposition, let's say, to the government in power, then we have seen definitely that government coming down in the elections. So what the government in power definitely would not like seeing happen is the farmers' vote to consolidate. As long as the farmers' vote is divided along other lines, regional, caste lines, and so on, then the government is more comfortable in using those divisions to get their votes.
Okay.
But the danger is the consolidation of the farmers' votes and the farmers' sentiment.
Right. Robinder, let me ask you this, though, because from what I understand, there are some other issues at play, and that the government had said that farmers need to be more flexible in what they produce, because India is a huge importer of pulses or legumes, as they might be known otherwise, which is a staple in the Indian diet, and that too many farmers are insisting on wheat and rice crops when the government has said they'd like for them to shift to others, and then maybe they could talk better about, a minimum price standard for these farmers. So how much is that in play? Are the farmers considering those issues, or are they being stubborn on that side? And there's also, I'm sorry, I have to mention as well, a depleting water table that the government has mentioned that makes growing pulses even more of an imperative because it uses less water.
No, certainly. So, that is an issue, as you very well point out, and the depleting water tables, especially for crops like paddy, right? However, again, the issue comes if people are moving away from, let's say, the crops or diversifying their crop portfolio, the same thing comes up that, okay, what is the minimum price for that particular crop which they grow as an alternative, which is, gentler and less demanding on the water table, let's say, right? Now, again, there is no minimum support price for that, right? So what the farmer is getting, especially the small and the marginal kind of farmers, it's a nexus which has come up, which the government, despite its intents, is not able to break through, right? The government says, okay, on paper, we are giving MSP, okay, whatever the MSP is, they are giving to the farmers, they say. But as I explained earlier, what is happening actually is that the nexus down the line between the officials, between the government officials and the middlemen traders, wherein they're not accepting or discouraging taking in of the produce at the official collecting points. They are delaying them, discouraging them, and say like, okay, you go and sell in the open market wherever. The farmer is compelled, is desperate. He sells it goods at a much lower price. Some middle person trader buys it out. Then he sells it back to the government official at a arbitrage price, wherein both the trader makes some money and these officials make the money. And the government papers are correct that, okay, fine, we purchase 100 kilos of rice or wheat, whatever, at the MSP price. So that unless that nexus, that entrenched structural issue is addressed by the government, now the question could be, okay, why the government has not been able to break that nexus. That is a question for the government. Absolutely, I think the intentions are there, but they're not being able to convert their intentions into tangible results for the farmers as far as the MSP is concerned.
Devinder, let me ask you a wider question then. How much does all of this in India fit into the global phenomenon of farmers protesting? And the other larger question across the world is, do we tend to undervalue our farmers? Do we take them for granted even though we will effectively die without them and without a strong agricultural sector?
Well, both the questions, you asked me two questions, and I think they are very relevant and important to understand. What is happening in India is not much different from what is happening in Europe, for instance. In the protests that we have seen, farmers' protest in Europe, basically are about two things. Farmers were protesting, one, about the environmental regulations and so on. And of course, the second part was that the farmers were asking for a guaranteed price, but not in the form of what in India we want it as a minimum support price. Now, the French farmers, for instance, met the president a few days back and have, presented him a note which says that no farmer or no business, should be able to procure or purchase below the agriculture price that is fixed. And I think that is what the Indian farmers are also asking. Now, if I move to America, we find that American agriculture is also faced with the same kind of crisis, same in Canada, that the markets have failed to provide them a higher price. In fact, markets have also failed in Europe and India and the rest of the world to provide farmers with a higher price. So I think it is a question of rethinking as far as what kind of farming situation should we focus on, whether only we rely on markets as the mantra for increasing farm production and farm income, or whether we can go in for a kind of a guaranteed income for farmers by way of a assured price to farmers. I think this message is coming out very clearly, and I believe, to the other question, I think farmers globally, I think, need to come together. They can't be just divided on the basis of which continent they come from. But I think it is time they all come together, because they actually have the same issue to fight for. And I think that should be something interesting to look up in the years to follow. But that, I think, is the global situation. Now, your second question.
Sorry, you know what? We're down to our last minute and a half, actually, and I could see Robinder wanted to get in there quickly. Robinder, go ahead.
Quickly, to your point, I think that's a great question. We as a society, be it in India or globally, I think, undervalue our agri products. Right. I remember a good friend of mine, he went to an agriculture university in India, saying that his professor of economics would tell him, agriculture is never a business for any profits. You cannot make a living out of agriculture. That's a professor telling his students, right? And if you look at all the subsidies, I mean, the US has subsidies, the European Union has subsidies, in India we have subsidies by whichever name we call them. So agriculture, I would say absolutely, the products are undervalued by us or the markets, by the markets, I would say. Yeah. Absolutely, yes.
Kiran, I imagine you agree there. Go ahead. One final minute for you. 30 seconds, actually. Go ahead.
Yes, definitely undervalued, and I think that is something that a larger economic rethinking is required, because there's no reason why, for example, in India, 100 kilos bag of paddy costs 2,000 rupees, whereas an iPhone costs like 1.5 lakh rupees. How we value the produce that comes from the farmers, and basically devaluing the primary production seems to be at the root of the whole crisis. So that is something that really needs rethinking. And I do hope that this agitation of farmers that's happening in India, and also the global solidarity with agitations which are happening across the globe, would drive a certain policy rethink among the governments, beyond the immediate political considerations.
Okay. Kiran, that will have to be the final word. I'd like to thank all three of my panelists so much for joining us on this edition of The Newsmakers, and our viewers, of course, for being with us as always. Remember, you can follow us on X, and do be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel. I'm Andrea Sankey. We'll see you next time.